Today we have three of our best experts. On the line here we have Peter Haid, Eric Dietz, and Jack Mackey. I'm Carl Charisse, the CXPA Content Curator and Master of Ceremonies, if you will. And today we're going to be focusing on metrics, measurement, and ROI. I'd like to say it is the most important of the 6 disciplines of CX, but I'm sure I get some debate on that. But since 20% of the CCXP exam is devoted to metrics, measurement, and ROI, I think I stand on pretty firm ground here. So let me start by asking each of the 3 experts to just introduce themselves very briefly, 11 to 15 seconds worth. And we'll start with Eric.
Hi, this is Eric Dietz. I'm Vice President of Business Solutions for InMoment.
And Peter?
Yeah, good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you're at. This is Peter Haid, head of Trifecta CX, and I am in the Denver, Colorado area today.
Hi, everybody. This is Jack Mackey. I'm Chief Evangelist at SMG, focused on this area of customer experience measurement.
Well, thank you, all 3 of you. And before we start into today's questions here that I have for you, I also want to make mention that out there in Google Plus land, if you're out there listening in, you can certainly comment on the Google Hangout hashtag you see there, CXPA Hangout, or you can tweet your questions in. And we've got operators standing by to field those questions here, and as they come streaming in, I'll prioritize the ones that are coming from the outside. And but if I don't see anything, we'll just continue on with what I have here. So let's get started here today. The first question I have for the team here is, within the broadest spectrum of possible measures, how does one go about selecting and prioritizing exactly what to measure? And I'll just toss that out to anyone on the team here can start.
Well, this is Jack. So I introed last. I'll take a shot at this. I think the right answer is that there is no one-size-fits-all solution on that. I think everybody recognizes that every situation is a little bit unique, but the principle should be, I think we should measure what matters most in achieving the goal of customer experience measurement, which, in my view, is to win customer loyalty.
I wouldn't disagree with that.
Yeah, I'll take another angle on it as well. It definitely a good point there with reaching the goals and understanding what those are. I think in addition to that, one of the best ways to identify where to start is to look through the lens of journey mapping, or through some exercises using either data you have or exercises like that, finding key moments of truth, and they tend to be situations or touch points or parts of the experience that are going to have a higher degree of emotion attached to them. There's a lot of points in the experience with whether it's B2B or B2C, where you will have rational things you can measure, where the customer's satisfied with pricing, or they're satisfied with the time to deliver a service, things like that. The emotional parts are things that will come to life through journey mapping or through exercises that will drive you towards the behaviors of your staff and of the experience that you want to understand better. And I would suggest measuring those, leaning towards the higher emotion touch points first. And you really, to Jack's point, if your goal is customer loyalty, and whether that's through reducing effort or whether that's through making it such a splendid experience that people never forget, and delighting customers, your achievement of that goal is going to be directly connected to what you measure. And I think that there's only a couple. It doesn't take 15, 16 different points to measure that. It should only take a few. So that's my take on it. I don't know if you had anything to add, Eric or Jack or.
I mean, I don't know that I've got a ton to add. Perhaps it's another shade of lipstick on the same pig, but it's relative to metrics. I'm a big believer in like Jack was saying, figuring out those goals and then certainly understanding why. Why are you going to measure this? Is your goal to get this measure to benchmark? Is it to drive performance management? Is it to drive product innovation? Being very clear on why you are measuring in the first place, and then ultimately what are the downstream actions you're looking to take on a particular measure should then drive what's the metric we're going to use. And everything, again, both Jack and Peter said, I fully agree with.
And then Peter, just let me make a comment there. I think you really hit a nail on the head here about the downstream actions, because I think it goes without saying, you shouldn't be measuring what you're not ready and willing to act upon. So I think that's the most important part of it. Almost in a way doesn't matter. Well, it does matter what you measure. It also is dictated by the culture of the organization. What fits best? Where is the pain being felt the most? And I think that's a lot of times where organizations start, where they feel that pain. And that's the impetus for taking a measurement. But I think you're right, that follow-up action is a critical piece. Moving to, unless we have any more comments on that, I'm going to move to another question here. What do you see as the most significant difference in the measurement process or the measurement system if you're in a B2B organization versus a B2C organization? What do you see as the biggest differences, if any?
Well, I would say first, let me start with the similarities, which is I think whether it's B2B or B2C, it's P2P, right? It's people to people.
That's a good point.
And more, I'm reading and sensing that people inside organizations want to be treated like people that are consumers. So I think the big difference there is that individual consumers, which would be the B2C side, that's a much simpler situation than B2B, which obviously implies an organization, and within an organization is multiple people. So I think there's quite a big difference in the complications involved in measuring B2C. One last thing I'd add is that I think consumer experience measurement is typically focused on transactions, and transactions over time. I kind of believe that experience drives loyalty. And I think we all agree loyalty drives growth. So that's why this is such a big topic and such a growing industry. But ultimately, I think the consumer experience is simpler, and the B2B experience is not only more complex, but the stakes in B2B loyalty are so much higher. The difference between a bad meal and a late analysis or an incorrect shipment of millions of dollars worth of product, I mean, the stakes are not even comparable.
Mm-hmm. Great points.
My add to that would be, if you're dealing with a B2B, the B2B situations are more complex. You've got different layers in your customer base, which is another business to measure, influencers and decision makers, and there's different points that different people in the organization that are part of the decision-making process and are part of the loyalty outcome that you're trying to achieve. And so it's not only that it's going to be more complex. You may expect on your survey or your measurement program, if you're using something like that, you probably can expect sample sizes and sample rates to be a little bit lower than on a B2C side, and I think that's normal. I think the other thing that's a difference with the B2B measurement and the B2B approach is that you have a different pulse in which you're going to work with that customer base to figure out how things are going. It's going to be much more of a relationship type conversation. I think overall to understand how things are going, and you're not going to have the same level of data coming at you. So you really need to be careful with how often you check in with those customers, and also making sure that you fix and have a plan to go back to them before you continue to check in on the experience if nothing's been corrected. And so, great points, I think, on the complexity side. I think that's one of the key differences.
Yeah, and I'll just add a little bit to it, because or just an extension of, when we are talking about B2B being it's multi-touch or multi-point to multi-point on both the consumer and the business side, meaning in a B2B interaction, you've got multiple stakeholders on either side of the equation. The only point I was going to make was relative to standing up a measurement program in a B2B environment. You have to be very, very cognizant of those different personas that you're ultimately looking to get feedback from. Are you a decision maker? Are you an account manager? Are you a frontline individual? Those and that's at a minimum. There's probably more, well, I know there's more in larger B2B organizations. So when you deploy a measurement program, do not attempt to always insist upon the same measurement or deployment method for each of those personas. You have to figure out what is going to be most relevant for each of those personas. I mean, and again, some cases it may all be the same. Hey, we want to use an email-based survey as a listening post. I mean, fill in the blank on what it is. But I would, from what I've seen, more often than not, you have to be very, very, in order to get good response rates and get good volumes of feedback, and to Peter's point, it's still going to be less than what you'll typically see in a B2C environment. But in order to maximize your response, you have to pay homage to those different personas and be very, very honed in on what is relevant to them. You cannot treat them as equals.
You know, you, Eric and Peter, both talked about response rates, and specifically within B2B, and I agree with the points you made there, Eric. What other measures do you think could be effective for increasing response rate? That always seems to be a challenge. I know it was for me when I was in that position, but what can you do to boost response rates, especially on email surveys?
Well, I mean, I'll throw out something that's not necessarily survey related, but one of the biggest gaps that I see in a lot of programs is rarely does the business actually, or if I'm collecting feedback, rarely do those feedback collectors share back what they're doing with the data. I mean, there's the micro share, which is the closed loop process that Peter spoke to. All right, if someone's a detractor or they've had a bad experience, closing the loop with them, that's table stakes. But then going beyond that too, if you fundamentally made a change in your business as a result of feedback from these different personas, what are you doing to tell them what you've done? You know, in B2B organizations, like Jack said, the stakes are huge. So, you know, are the CEO of the company going back to their top tier customers in a personalized, you know, phone call to say, hey, thank you, Mr. Top tier customer, appreciate your feedback, this is what we're doing as a result of it. So, I mean, there's a lot of micro things you can do on how to tweak a survey invitation, the language of the survey invitation, but from what I've seen, the more you can demonstrate that your business is using the feedback and you appreciated it, and it's not a self-serving, hey, just give me data to tell me about me. It's, I'm getting data because I want to help you have a better experience. Here's what we're doing. That would be a bigger catalyst for increases.
Well, you know, we're getting close to our end time here, but we did have a question come in from Matthew Hines over Twitter, and here's the question. When working to retain customers, and this is software users in a B2B setting, is it more effective to win over the C-suite or the users?
Well, the first thing that comes to my mind is that's not an either-or thing. If the users rebel, the C-suite's going to react to that. If the C-suite has its own issues with the solution, they're going to make a business decision whether the users like it or not. So I don't think you can ignore either group.
Okay.
I would add one piece to that as well, is that if the users are happy, your time spent there on the experience may go further, because the C-suite's not going to be using the software. I'm not sure what software we're talking about, but generally the users are going to be experiencing that, and hopefully the C-suite's listening to their employees. And if not, of course, you do hit both paths in a parallel way. But time spent on the experience, I think you've got maybe a little bit more distance to go with users. But
Well, okay, great. Thank you very much. I'd like to end with and get your just kind of quick reaction to one last question here. If you had one piece of advice to offer the CXPA community around metrics measurement and ROI, what would it be?
Well, I'd say first of all, avoid any appearance that you are in charge of a report card, and instead keep in mind that due to turnover in your organization and the passage of time, you can never reinforce enough the importance of the metrics and what they mean.
Eric?
Yeah, I'll repeat something I said earlier. Be very clear on why you're measuring and what you're trying to accomplish, and whose butt is going to be stapled to the measurement program and the individual measures. If you're not clear on any of that, you're wasting your time.
Good way to put it. Peter?
I think from one piece of advice I would give is start small, and you don't need a listening post that has 15 angles on it. You can get away with 2 or 3 to start, and get a quick win or two. Show an organization that you're partnered with internally how you can help them achieve their goals and help the customer at the same time, and transparency and honesty back to the customer at all times.
Well, those are all great pieces of advice, and I want to thank you, Peter, Eric, and Jack, for your insights today. This is the end of our Google Hangout for June, and have a great day, the rest of the day, all of you. I know it's a busy one for all of us, so take care, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Carl. Bye.
Thank you, Carl. Thanks.